morning, everyone. My name is Pat Dillon, and I am the director of the Minnesota SBIR and STTR office at the Minnesota Technology Association. So my talk today is about non-dilutive funding to support technology commercialization. It's an overview of the federal small business innovation research and small business technology transfer programs. I found this quote not too long ago, and I thought it was really appropriate for the kinds of companies that participate in these two federal programs, and that they have big things that often have very small beginnings. So when I think about the SBIR and STTR programs and the investments that taxpayers make every year to support innovation and commercialization activities across the spectrum of science, technology, and engineering and manufacturing, I'm really excited that these two programs continue to be supported and authorized by Congress, and of course appropriated funding to support innovation in small businesses. So this presentation today is going to be about 20 minutes, and then I will follow it up with some Q&A. So we're going to cover these topics today. And my goal is to inspire you to take action. This is a really incredible source of funding for startups and existing companies that really want to bring a new innovation to the marketplace. And oftentimes, small businesses or startups in particular do not have the financial resources to support that high risk, high payoff R&D that is often covered in the SBIR and STTR programs. So we're going to talk about the programs and the impact that it's had here and nationally, but certainly here in Minnesota. We're going to talk about the eligibility of small businesses participating in this program, and then some success stories, of course, and then relevance of SBIR and STTR to not only our economy, but certainly the economy of the US as a whole. And then the agencies and budgets, the phases and the funding levels, and then project and agency match, which is a really critical step in the whole process. And then, of course, our work that we do to support innovators and entrepreneurs in Minnesota to navigate through the federal R&D system to acquire these dollars to support their R&D efforts. And then lastly, a discussion about our accelerator cohorts that we're offering starting again in October. So here are some companies that have successfully acquired SBIR and STTR funding over the past 30, 40 years. So we have some companies up here in the left corner, Surmatics, NVE, CyberOptics. All those companies are publicly held, but they all got started with SBIR and STTR funding many years ago. And they acquired quite a bit of funding to support their R&D efforts. And of course, they had a business case and a business model that allowed them to move forward to become a publicly held company. And then we have Hydrotron and Beamogen Biotechnologies. Those two companies, and there are several others, but they merged or were acquired by large companies. And then we have a whole slew of startups and small businesses that are currently have active SBIR, STTR projects and have been very successful in acquiring this funding. They're not household names, but you know it's a phenomenal program, and it really supports a lot of companies that are not only being spun off from the University of Minnesota, and of course Mayo Clinic, and then companies in the private sector. So these two programs, the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs, are really focused on developing new technologies that will hopefully result in a new product or service or process sometime in the future. And today, these two programs represent about $3.7 billion in federal funding each year. And the agencies that participate, and there are 11 agencies, are required by law to take a certain percentage of their extramural R&D funding and set it aside for small businesses to these programs. So there's, as agency budgets increase or decrease, and so does the SBIR and STTR programs, but the programs today, this fiscal year, is about $3.7 billion. Now, on a national level, the impact has been pretty phenomenal. When I think about how much money has been allocated to these two programs since 1982, it's over $50 billion. And what's really important for small businesses that are participating in these programs is that it doesn't, the government doesn't take a stake in your company, and you own the IP. And this is a very attractive feature associated with the SBIR and STTR programs. And there's been over 5,000 awards every year across the agencies. And it's really led to some pretty significant, large, successful companies in the United States. And of course, Qualcomm is the granddaddy of them all. And then we have iRobot, Illumina, and then Symantec as some other representations of companies that have been successful in getting this funding when they were a small business. So overall in Minnesota, we've had about $765 million that's been awarded to companies since 1982. And of course, you can read the details about some of the metrics that exist within our portfolio of companies. I think what's really unique, and we have this data, is that, you know, it really does support startups and small businesses to grow and get to the point where they're probably a good candidate to either merge with another company or be acquired. And we've had about 30 companies since 1982 that have done that, merged or been acquired. And some of the data shows that it was a pretty significant purchases that occurred with some of those companies. And then recently, you know, the 2019 data, which is the most recent, you know, we've had $37 million in awards, about 47 companies, and the technology areas are very diverse. And this is a blessing and a curse from my perspective sometimes, because the work that I do is you have to jump from one technology area to another, and you can't go deep in any one area. But the beauty is that there's a lot of opportunity for Minnesota companies to participate in these programs. So as a small business, you have to be organized for a profit. You don't have to be making a profit, but you just have to be organized as a profit. And your work has to be done in the United States. They have some ownership and control requirements as well associated with the companies. And it's really important for individuals to understand that 50%, more than 50% of the ownership and control has to be by US citizens or resident aliens. So if you have a colleague that might be an immigrant that is not a resident alien, it will be very difficult for them to participate in the programs because they don't meet that requirement. And, you know, the programs can go up to awardees can be up to 500 employees, and this includes their affiliates. And this is a very challenging topic area. And normally, if we have an issue with a potential client that is in this arena and at the 500 employee level, and do they include other affiliates, then we have to work towards getting a size determination by the Small Business Administration. And then we have certain agencies allow venture capital-backed small businesses to participate in the programs. And the one that's the most relevant to the discussion today is the National Institutes of Health, which does allow venture capital-backed firms to participate in the program. So these are the funding agencies that participate in the programs, and there are 11, and they each have their own mission, their own source of funding, and their own way of administering their SBIR program. And the agencies that are in the green boxes are those agencies that do both SBIR and STTR programs, and the blue are the only agencies that participate in the SBIR program. You might be asking, well, why are there some agencies that operate or administer both programs and only a few that operate one of the programs? It has to do with their overall extramural budget. For the agencies that participate in both SBIR and STTR, they have over $1 billion in extramural R&D funding, and so Congress has mandated that they operate both programs. Whereas those agencies with less than $1 billion in extramural funding have to participate only in the SBIR program. Now, I will say that with each of these agencies, there are, in many cases, sub components underneath some of these agencies, and the most prolific is the Department of Defense and the Department of Health and Human Services. These are very large agencies that have very large SBIR and STTR budgets, and they have lots of different organizations underneath their umbrella organization. And this becomes a great opportunity for companies, but it's also kind of overwhelming to really find a good fit for what you're proposing to do. So these are the agencies, the budgets for each of the agencies. And as you can see, DOD has a very large budget, as well as the Health and Human Services. And then you have Department of Energy and National Science Foundation and NASA. Those make up the 5 large agencies. And then the smaller agencies are the smaller slice. The technology areas across these agencies are sometimes are obviously very distinct, but sometimes they do have overlap. So when we work with companies on determining which agencies they should target as a potential funding source, we're often, migrating from one agency to another to help develop a technology roadmap for the company so that they can propose projects that are relevant not only to their business, but of course to the potential funding agency. So one thing that I have come to really appreciate in the last several years, and I've been involved with the SBIR and STTR programs for a very long time, is that these agencies are doing things very differently from one another. Although the congressional legislation does allow or does require certain amount of consistency among the agencies or framework for the programs, there's still very much a difference among these agencies and how they actually administer their programs. The agencies have different solicitation timelines, different proposal requirements, of course, different research topics, They each have their own mission, funding levels. All of these factors come into play, and sometimes it's not so challenging for a business if they're only focused on one agency, but when you start to cross over to other agencies, what you might have done for one agency is likely going to be different for the other agencies. So this is very challenging, I think, for newcomers, new proposers to the programs, is to understand the federal R&D arena and how this process and system works is a high learning curve for many new proposers. So I think it would be important to sort of lay out, well, what does this really look like for a small business or a startup that's looking at SBIR or STTR funding? Where does it fit into the grand scheme of a company? And so when you think about the what's required in phase one, which is the first phase that companies have to be successful in acquiring those dollars to transition to the other phases, it's really aimed at the proof of concept. What is the idea, the concept of the project that's being proposed, and what's the commercial potential of that new product or service or process that's being developed, and how can SBIR and STTR funding support that effort? So with SBIR and STTR, and I'm focused on the healthcare medical arena today, is that there's the potential of $5 to $6 million over 3 phases over several years to help support not only the development, research and development of a device, a mobile app, there's all sorts of projects that are focused on the medical arena. And what we're looking at is over a period of 3 phases, the potential, depending upon the health condition that's being researched and developed and so forth, but it could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $6 million that's available for one project. Now, I've been working with entrepreneurs for a long time, and I've never met an entrepreneur with just one idea. So I think it would be, really important for entrepreneurs to really think about what their technology roadmap is for their business, and then thinking about how does SBIR and STTR play in that arena for them, and how does it support them not only with this non-dilutive funding, but then how does it play in with all the other sources of funding that might be required to bring that new technology or new product or service to the marketplace. The other spin, or the other model that I think is important for like academic entrepreneurs is that's licensing a technology from, like, for example, the University of Minnesota, Mayo Clinic, or maybe some other academic institution. How does SBIR and STTR funding play in that arena? It's basically the same process. And again, I think, as a nation, when we allocate over $150 billion in R&D and basic research that results in a new discovery and that's available for licensing, we as entrepreneurs here in Minnesota and even across the country need to look at our academic institutions as a possible source of funding or possible source of technology that can be commercialized, and using SBIR and STTR funding to support that effort. So what do we do here at MNSBIR? So we are the governor's resource to help small businesses, startups, small businesses to access this source of funding. And it is highly competitive. It is highly complex. We try to take the mystery out of it for the companies that we work with to help them get to the winner's circle. And it's a team effort. So we're looking at promising companies or promising projects that can, be successful in getting funding and then transitioning to commercialization. So we get involved in outreach and training and assistance. It's free and it's confidential. And I'm going to focus on the assistance, since that is the core of what we do on a daily basis. So as I talked about, we want to make sure that our companies are eligible, because it is a problem if they request funding and then they're awarded and it turns out that they're not an eligible small business. We help companies identify funding opportunities. And of course, we take a look at, how does that fit with not only your business, but certainly with your technology roadmap. We do somewhat of a technology due diligence. We want to make sure that the company or the project is a good fit with the programs. And this is a really important step with most of the projects, because we've been involved in working with many companies over the years, and knowing what is going to be competitive at the national level is a really important step. And it helps to avoid spending 150 to 200 hours of your time and effort on putting together a proposal and may not have a good chance of being selected for funding. So we want to make sure that it's a good fit. Project definition. I think this is probably most of the challenging parts for some companies to really define what is the scope of work for a phase one project. And oftentimes I use the analogy of a scale of 1 being basic research and 10 being commercialization. And we're at the 2-3 stage level to help move something towards commercialization, or at stage 10. I've talked about the technology roadmap and assessment. I really strongly encourage our companies to put together a plan so that they are submitting proposals that are relevant not only to their business, but to the agencies that could be a possible funding source for them. And then we do talk, of course, a lot about technology transfer opportunities, like at the University of Minnesota, Mayo Clinic, or even our federal laboratories or other academic institutions. And then we do have some connections with the Angel and Venture Capital Network here in Minnesota. And then I strongly encourage people to also take a look at the SciTech internship program, which is another program of Minnesota Technology Association. And many of our SBIR, STTR funded companies do leverage this program to bring in the STEM talent to help support their efforts. And then, of course, we work with attorneys and accountants and other professionals to help support our companies. So how do you get started? So this last year we started an SBIR STTR accelerator. And in our accelerator, it's aimed at really working with those promising startup or existing companies to help them prepare and submit a high quality research proposal that has a high likelihood of being funded. And I, had several companies that have come through the accelerator and have been funded. And, the data so far shows that about $10 million has been awarded to the companies that have been in the accelerator. And I have a team of other people that I bring on to help maybe support some of the discussions and the reviews of the proposals and budgets and so forth to help ensure that the companies are submitting quality proposals. So starting in October, we have some information sessions, and I would encourage you to participate in this 30-minute discussion, and which will then lead to a formal application if you decide that you want to step into this arena. And we have this accelerator application that we ask any attendee who wants to participate in a cohort to apply. You have to be accepted into the cohort in order to participate in the training and the hands-on assistance. So here's my contact information, and I'll open it up to questions now. Are there any questions? Well, hi, Tom. Can you hear me? So I guess, starting a veteran-owned small business, I would, look at the Small Business Development Center to help, create your veteran-owned small business. Of course, the VA may have, well, I don't know if they have any services, but, the Small Business Administration also has veteran programs available to them. Okay, so we have a question from Anna. Well, I think, first of all, with respect to research funding specific to women's med tech, I would take a look at a program called the National Institutes of Health Application Assistance Program, which is a special program set aside to help women women owners of med tech companies, and to have them work with them to draft and submit a high quality proposal. It's kind of like very similar to what the accelerator is about, but they are very focused on the NIH program. So does the MNSB require that the companies they work with are based here in Minnesota? Yes. You can have your headquarters somewhere else, but if you reach out to me and take a look at our website, MNSBIR, at Minnesota Technology Association. But if you're located here, that's fine. So Anna, with respect to your question again, the application assistance program is currently accepting applications. So I would definitely just do a search for NIH Application Assistance Program and make sure you get your application into them as soon as possible, because they'll be closing that opportunity. They'll be doing their reviews and evaluations and reviews and selections of the medtech companies that'll be participating in that program. So Sam, with respect to legal concessions, there are no IP is intact for 20 years, so it follows the same patent law. And you know, there's another congressional act that was passed years ago called the BuyDole Act, and the BuyDole Act allows universities and small businesses to profit from the commercialization of their technology. And so when we look at SBIR and STTR funding, I think what's really the true value of the program, of course, is non-dilutive funding, and you keep the IP. But then there's the potential for phase 3 sole source contracts, and I sort of didn't talk about it today. But for some projects, and this is true with with any federal agency, or for any SBIR, STTR funded project, if you develop that obviously into a product or service, and then the government, any government agency, federal government agency has a need or a requirement for that product or service, and if you can show that it would derive from or extended from an SBIR, STTR project, you could exercise what they call these sole source rights. This is significant. And just recently, the Navy announced an award to a small business because it had developed something that the Navy wanted, and they did it in phase 1 and then phase 2, and then it resulted, you know, years later in a $22 million phase 3 award. So this is I just find this a really significant component of the SBIR and STTR program, and this has been part of the legislation since 1982. And I will say that commercialization, that is the focus of these programs now. In fact, in the first phase of the proposal, the first proposal that you submit, the agency will want to have some discussion about the market opportunity that exists for that future product or service that you're developing. And in the case of the National Science Foundation, they will want to see, you know, 6 or 7 pages dedicated to the customer, the market, the competition, your financing strategy, your revenue model, your intellectual property plan or strategy. So it's along with, of course, the R&D section. And they also require 3 letters to show market validation. So this is a really, the programs have really changed over the years. And I recently did an analysis of all the agencies, of what they require in phase 1 as it relates to commercialization. And of all the agencies, they all now require some discussion, whether it's 1 page or whether it's 3 or 4 pages, or in the case of NSF, it's, you know, could be 6 or 7 pages of that 15-page proposal. So, but NIH, they, you know, they're of course looking at, well, what's the unmet medical need? What's the scientific premise behind the research that you're proposing? What is the product or service that you are planning to develop? And it's really just maybe a paragraph in the proposal. However, with NIH, they have 3 different funding pathways. And, you know, I always say the standard phase 1, phase 2 pathway, but then they also have a fast track, which is a phase 1 and a phase 2 proposal, plus the commercialization plan that's submitted all at the same time. And it goes through the review process at the same time. And they either fund the project or they don't fund it. And, you know, this is a really important, for some projects, if you can lay out the project over a period of 3 to 5 years, you know exactly what you need to do in phase 1, what your milestones are going to be, and then how does that transition into a phase 2 proposal. And then, of course, having that 12-page commercialization plan. And then they also have what they call a directive phase 2, which is really starting at the phase 2 level. So maybe you've done the technical feasibility work in phase 1 on your own dime, and now you're ready to start in a directive phase 2 kind of effort. Well, this is a valuable pathway for certain projects that really lend itself to that pathway. And so one thing that I think with NIH and NSF, they're both fund biomedical related research projects, and then also the Department of Defense through the Army Medical Research Command or with the Defense Health Agency. And these agencies are doing things differently. So NIH and NSF offered grants, whereas the Department of Defense offers contracts. And this is a big difference between grants and contracts. Grants are typically, it's focused on like a PI-initiated project. So a principal investigator has an innovative idea or concept, and the agency has the money and the mission. And so that PI can propose his or her project to that agency for funding. Whereas the contracting agencies like DoD and NASA, they are very, very focused on solving a problem that they are experiencing. And so they really drive the topics that are issued in their solicitations, and you're responding to those topics and what they have laid out for a phase 1 effort. So so when I think about, advising companies through the process, it's really looking at, well, which agencies, and then coming up with that roadmap and maybe making the decision that, for the first couple of submissions, we're going to do maybe just proposals to granting agencies as opposed to the contracting agencies. But we're always going to be monitoring what's happening with the contracting agencies. So are there any other questions? I could talk for an hour. Oh, yes, Sam. Thank you for that confirmation, validation for the accelerator. I can definitely say that, navigating the federal R&D arena is a difficult and challenging. However, it's not insurmountable. And, and I have, close to 30 years of working in the federal R&D arena. So so Joe, with respect to how many participants, depends upon, so we're all doing it online, so we can actually accommodate more participants. And so I would encourage you to look at or attending the 30-minute informational session, and then also taking a looking at our website about the NIH SBIR cohort and what we cover. And then Alex, okay, so yes, we are your advisors to help you navigate the R&D arena. And that's where we're funded through the Small Business Administration and through the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, with support from the University of Minnesota and Mayo Clinic. Yes, thank you very much for that. Okay, Alex, that's fantastic. So I got a few more minutes left here. So one thing that I what I encourage you to do is to look at the federal website, SBIR.gov, and just spend some time looking at and reading about the programs. I would also encourage you to take a look at the tutorials that are on the SBIR.gov website. And, this is, ultimately the company receives a federal grant or a contract, much like, the University of Minnesota and Mayo Clinic. They too participate in the federal R&D arena. So there's a lot of processes and requirements and placed on the companies that receive funding through these two programs. But when I think about, how long it takes to sometimes raise capital through investors, I would prefer that companies not only look at SBIR and STTR funding along with trying to raise capital through investors. And in fact, with some of the agencies, it's become not a requirement, but it's certainly, if you want to be competitive, you're going to have other sources of funding to support the commercialization effort. And they will want to see that as a part of the commercialization plan. So, so we've got just a couple more minutes here, and I appreciate everybody's participation and questions, and hopefully we'll see you in the accelerator.